defining.
All right,
Because that
good
it doesn't
evening.
serve.
This is Adam
And
Sturch broadcasting
we
from
have
Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico,
committed
working
ourselves
oil
to this
painting
thing
as of yet
so
unnamed.
whole hog for the past 10,000 years that
All right,
now
I've
we're
got
so
some deep
into
purple
it
mixed
that
up to
it's
start
not
with the
clear we
background,
can
a little
ever
black and a little white,
extricate
and I'm
ourselves
just going
from
to play with some color
except,
right
and this is the raison d'etre for my career, is we have to go back to the archaic solution, which is, and it can't be orgy. That can't be the archaic solution that we implement, because we're not a nomadic tribe of pastoralists, only 70 or 80 human beings. We're a global culture of 5 billion people. If we tried to resuscitate lunar orgies, we'd have a wave of social and sexually transmitted diseases that would probably finish us once and for all. So the orgy thing is not the answer. But the psychedelic option still exists, it still dissolves the ego, and it still puts you in contact with viable group values. So this is perhaps an answer. And I don't advocate it because I think it's a sure thing. I advocate it because I think it's the only game in town. Hell, if hortatory beating on people could have worked, then we would have solved all our problems thousands of years ago, because Buddha and Christ and all these other people, they had the right idea. It's just that ideas don't cut the mustard. It has to be an experience, a real experience. And a boundary-dissolving experience is so corrosive to all the institutions that dominate our society that no religion in the West since has been able to come to terms with the psychedelic experience, because it mitigates male dominance, hierarchy, and all the other things that are the methods by which we do business.
Why do you think the nature would have it that there would be this window of opportunity to develop an ego to begin with? What? You know,
well, it was that we had a chemically mediated symbiosis with the Gaian mind, and it was it wasn't a locked symbiosis like you get in lichens or something like that. It was a kind of flirtation with symbiosis. It was that we took these psychedelic plants and contacted this hyperdimensional mind of nature, and discovered that because it was hyperdimensional, because it wasn't constrained in space and time the way we are, that it had useful information, very practical information. Where has the game gone? This is what shamans are good for, is to tell you where the game has gone. How will the weather be next year? Classical problem for shamans. Well, how do they know this stuff? So you see, shamanism is essentially a going into a higher dimension to obtain information that then feeds back into the group destiny. Well, how can these shamans know this stuff? How can they attain to this superhuman level of understanding? It's that they get in touch with a different kind of intelligence. An intelligence to whom where the game will be next year is as transparent as where the game was last year, because past and future don't exist for that intelligence. And our relationship to that intelligence was one of devotee to goddess, or supplicant to mystery. But eventually the connection was broken, and meanwhile the ego was arising, and the ego is like a mirroring of this larger psychic function. In other words, the ego is our pathetic attempt to create God on our own. This was Julian Jaynes' theory. He thought, you see, that up until as late as Homeric times, which is 800 BC, that if you got into a tight spot and were about to be offed or something, miraculously a voice would appear, would come on. It would just turn on in your head, and it would say, "You should get out of there." And people thought this was a god. It was a god. But eventually they were able to assimilate this psychic function into the personality. And then they said, well, that's not God talking, that's me. That's myself. And this is the idea where God is then located inside my body. And I take orders from this inner God that I call the ego. And if it is allowed to develop, and it's strange, it always develops along these patriarchal lines, you know. It brooks no babbling. It's not interested in argument. It knows what is to be done. And then the only time you get a problem is when you place one ego in contact with another. And then, of course, they go at it, hammer and tongs. But originally what we had was a symbiotic relationship with this Gaian mind. And this is the mystery that haunts this planet, haunts our history, haunts our psychedelic experiences and our dreams. It's that there really is a controlling super intelligence that can be contacted through psychedelic drugs, presumably religious practice, when you see how long they've been making the claim, although it must be a high noise signal when you do it that way, because they seem to get it always skewed off in some weird direction that then reinforces paternalistic institutions. But this is what all this goddess talk is about, is either we are becoming more sensitive to the presence of the Gaian mind, or the Gaian mind, under pressure of the approaching apocalyptic crisis, is beginning to raise its voice louder and louder and louder. So that now, you know, when you go into nature loaded, every rock, every tree, every stream is saying, awaken, awaken, come to focus. There's minutes to go, as William Burroughs likes to say, you know. So we have to connect up. And so we are, in a sense, the hands of this diffuse supermind that is spread through nature. And our presence as thinking, reflecting, culture-building individuals is not simply an amazing but meaningless set of circumstances. Our presence as a global technical civilization signifies the onset of the final crisis. It's as though, you know, you watch a pond and the surface is smooth, mirror smooth. Well, then the surface of the pond begins to churn. This is the signal that something huge is about to emerge out of the pond. And human history is that turbulence on the still surface of nature. Nature would never have allowed a phenomenon like human history to get going were it not in response to a deeply felt planetary crisis that is approaching at ever-accelerating speed. And I have enough faith in nature to believe that when the moment finally is upon us, we'll be ready. But the tools are being laid up right now. The ultimate tools, not the prototype tools. The bow and arrow, that was a prototype. The catapult, that was a prototype. The B-17, that was a prototype. But thermonuclear tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles, this is not the prototype. This is the actual instrument by which you could save a planet as well as destroy it, because you're at last dealing on the level of energies necessary to make those kinds of changes. And I think the evidence is all around us that the historical mode cannot persist. It can't. Just draw all the curves. Output of petroleum distillates, output of energy, population growth, proliferation of weapons. When you draw all of these curves, they can't be propagated 500 years into the future. Sometime in the next 50 years, we're going to have to make or break what history was all about. And the arising of global culture, the arising of an integrated electronic awareness,
I had the aperture a
high-speed
little low there.
computational machinery,
But that laid down
powerful
some very
weapons,
nice, I think,
spacecraft,
texture
all of this stuff looks to
and
me
deep
like
tone.
the raw material
So
for
I think I'm going to leave that there and see where it
salvational
develops.
exercise.
I'll probably come up
And
with some kind of theme or
notice
title or
that it's not
imagery
only a
before I
way
post
to
this,
save
but
the
as of yet
planet,
it is still
it's
untitled.
in a sense
That's Adam Sturch
a
podcasting
way
from the
to
Mushroom Mansion,
save
Dallas,
not only
Mexico, working on
ourselves, but to
this purple,
save our
black, white oil painting.
ancestors as well.
Have a good night, Earth.
This, if we